Hey everybody, welcome to Pianist Academy. I'm Charles Szczepanek. We had a little tech issue with the countdown timer, so welcome. We're ready to start. Thanks for joining me here. I'm in Colorado Springs in the USA. It's 10 o'clock in the morning. I'd love to hear, there's a handful of you here already, so I'd love to hear who is tuning in and where are you tuning in from. It's always fun. Sparrowhawk, welcome. So fingers crossed that the tech issues don't continue the rest of the day. I think it was just the video from my iPad, so that's good. Juan, Sir Wolseley, Dith, aren't flannels the best? Oh gosh, funny story. I have a niece who's pretty young. She's 11, and I picked her up from the airport a few months ago, and she was like, "That's my uncle, the one in the really ugly flannel." Kids, I think flannels are cool. And Dith, it sounds like you do too. Welcome, Bunny, Becky. Welcome, Bethany, and Sir Wolseley, and Salman. Hello, Monaco, brilliant. Yeah, Dith, light jacket weather. I know, isn't it that time of year? A lot of people, I think, unless you're pretty close to the equator, I think it's getting to be cooler weather. I have a student actually in Montana that was expecting 10 inches of snow yesterday or the day before, and it's not even the end of October. So awesome. And so welcome, everybody. Thanks for being here. And Sir Wolseley asked, what are we doing today? We're going to kick today off with, and I don't even know if they're here, but hopefully, and they can always rewatch the replay, Rhodesy had sent in an improv for us to take a listen to and to get a couple comments on. So this is, we're going to listen to about, he sent in 10 minutes, and we're going to listen to, I think, the first 2 minutes of his improv. I'm going to give a little bit of reaction to that, and that's how we're going to kick today off. And then the whole rest of the time will be open to everybody's questions. And I won't forget to drink my coffee. So why don't we jump in, and when Rhodesy gets here, or I'll let him know later that it's posted and it's live. But let's take a listen. I'm not even sure that this has a title other than an improv, and that's always good to know because it's completely off the top of the head, live, one take. So we'll go from there and see what happens. Okay, so here is Rhodesy improving on a public piano. Okay, Hey, welcome, Rhodesy. I see that you joined us. We're going to stop at about 2 minutes in. I know you played another 8 minutes here, but I think we can cover a whole bunch of stuff in those first 2 minutes. So first off, hey, let's drop some applause in the chat for Rhodesy. Nice work. Oh, cool. So Rhodesy, you're basically in the key of C for some of it, and D flat for a couple other sections. There we go, Dith. Yeah, round of applause from Dith. Awesome. I think, Easy Bunny, awesome job. Love the improv. Brilliant. I think my comments are going to fall into a couple of general categories. One, you have a great understanding of certain harmonic, let's say, elements of harmonic vocabulary, if you will. And you use words that you say that wasn't your full potential because you haven't practiced. Practice is good. We all know that. Oh, and yeah, Bethany says, cool, building reflection. Yeah, that is really cool. So, yeah, some of the things that I see, Rhodesy, are a really neat understanding of a couple different elements of harmony and their function. So just in those two keys that we were in, obviously, you know your way around C pretty well. And I think you were using a little bit of an A flat augmented chord, which is interesting. So you could either think of it as A flat or like a G sharp, raised fifth scale degree, something like that. Cool. Lots of scales, lots of trills, things like that. That's great. Even when you switched over to D flat, same thing. There was a very Chopinesque style run that you threw in. That's fun. And it probably, I would think that, and correct me if I'm wrong, I would think that would mean that you have played at least one or more of the nocturnes. Maybe the really famous one in D flat. Yeah, let us know that. Have you played that? I can't even remember the opus and the number. 27, number 2. Because the run that you gave us, I can't remember which note you went up to. There it is. I think that was the one. Going up to the 6th scale degree. That's interesting. Very, very reminiscent of Chopin. Okay, so you say just inspired, never played them, but you played the Minute Waltz. Okay, cool. That's a fun one. So let's talk a little bit about where we can go from here and how we can continue to make improv and also composition better, because I think these two are so intertwined with one another. And in fact, this is going to be the topic of a video on the channel maybe next month, hopefully soon. I've been wanting to do it for a while, but the title is going to be something like, should performers compose? I'll just give you the answer for those of you that are here and that watch later. I think it's yes. We'll dive into more of that when that video comes out. But for now, okay, Rhodesy, I have a couple challenges for you. One, first off, limit yourself in your improv. I did listen through your 10 minutes before we started today. Limit yourself to try to take us on a musical journey in only one key. As you go through, and even in these first 2 minutes, we're in C, and then we go to D flat with a direct modulation, where we just go there just on one particular beat, and then we come back to C, and I think we go there again later on. There might be another key thrown in there in the middle of that. But challenge yourself to improv only in one key, first of all, and take us on a journey, musical journey, and on an emotional journey, limited to the harmonic vocabulary just in that single key. So you don't get the opportunity, let's say, to throw in other keys or directly modulate or do those other things to add interest and to add excitement or change it up. But we have to figure out how to do all of those things just using harmony within one key. Rhodesy, is your modulation good? Let's classify modulations a little bit. Direct modulation is a thing, and that's what you did. You went directly from C into D flat. And D flat is a key that's very far away from the tonal center of C. And usually we hear direct modulations by half step in pop music. That's a super common thing in pop music. It's very uncommon in classical music and in jazz. So because of the style you're playing, the direct modulation sounds a little abrupt. But if you were playing a pop song and you did the same thing, it would be like perfect. So a couple other styles of modulation. This is another challenge that I had for you. I would look into a couple other ways of moving from key to key, or understanding what key can we move to, what keys are the easiest to move to. So for example, if I want to go to the mediant or the chromatic mediant, like if I'm in C and I want to modulate to E flat, which is not all that closely related, but I can get there through the use of flat major 7, turning it into a dominant chord. And then we land in E flat. So if we got a little bit more understanding of secondary dominant chords and how they can lead us from one key into another key. And then likewise, when we're in E flat, how do we get back to C if we want to? So that was using another secondary dominant chord. That's one other type of modulation you could think about. The next one that I would throw at you would be using diminished chords, like the 7 diminished 7 in any scale. And how can we use 7 diminished 7 in different keys to pull us to another key? And Rhodesy, you say you like D flat and G flat because it's comfy. Yeah. I think that's a good comment. I like D flat, I like G flat, I like B major. B flat minor, I love B flat minor. I don't write much in B flat minor, but I love playing in it. Let's see, this is related. Bunny asked, what kind of course would I take to learn how scales are related? Let me see. Yeah, related, etc. There's probably a lot of theory resources out there online. The first thing that you would need to know, Bunny and also Rhodesy, the first thing you need to know is let's understand all of our diatonic harmony. Diatonic are, what are the 7 chords? Since we're in the key of C, what are the 7 chords that are in the key of C? The 1 chord is C, the 2 chord is D minor, the 3 chord is E minor, the 4 chord is F, the 5 chord is G, 6 is A minor, 7 is B diminished. Can we understand all 7 of those and how they function? So, and this has a lot to do with improv. It's improv and composition, but when we improv, we're composing on the spot. So we still need to have the same understanding, but we might be, let's say, limited in how much is at the tips of our fingers versus how much we conceptually know when we have time to put it all down on paper. So if we're in C and C is our tonic, what other, and Rhodesy, feel free to either answer this as I go. I'm probably not going to give you enough time to type it in the chat, but Rhodesy and Bunny, what are chords fall into 3 categories. We have tonic chords, predominant chords, and dominant chords. Those are 3 functions of harmony. In our 7 diatonic chords that are in the key, which ones are tonic? Which ones are home? Of course, the 1 chord is home. The next, let's see, most used chord for home would be 6. 6 would always be featured in a deceptive cadence. So if we're in C and we use a deceptive cadence from the 5 chord, we move to 6. 6 sounds somewhat like home, and it's also a resolution from our dominant, right? And another chord that sometimes can function like tonic is our minor 3 chord. It's much more rare than the other 2, but because 3 shares 2 pitches with the tonic, with the 1 chord, so in the key of C, E and G are the 2 shared pitches. And in fact, if we build a C major 7, it includes all of the notes that we find in E minor, which is our 3 chord. So sometimes 3 can feel like home also. Rhodesy, yes. You say E minor, yes, yes. Okay, those are 3 chords, right? But they fall into one single function. The next function is predominant. What are all of the chords that function as a predominant? Predominant is like when we want our harmony and our piece to be extended and extended and extended before it resolves and goes back home. Those are predominant chords. So our predominant chords are going to be the 2 chord, the 4 chord, sometimes the 3 chord, and sometimes, if it's not resolved from a dominant, the 6 chord also. So now you can see some of these chords have double meanings. Sometimes, depending on the context, they can be tonic, home. Sometimes they can be predominant or elongating our harmony. Then we have 2 more chords, our dominant chords. Dominants in C are G and our B diminished. Our G7 contains the B diminished chord. Here's a question for everybody, because this is important for performers also. What pitch in particular makes a dominant chord dominant? There's one particular note that needs to be in the chord for it to function as a dominant chord. Does anybody know what that is? This gives me a perfect opportunity for a sip. Rhodesy, the middle note. Well, it could be. It could be. There's a very, very specific term that I'm looking for. It's 2 words. The second word, we can play a little game. The second word is tone, which doesn't help you very much. You already know it's a tone, but I can't give you the first word because it'll give the whole answer away. Anybody else? We've got Rhodesy and Bunny chiming in here, but anybody else who's here, you want to take a stab? What is the, Rhodesy says whole tone. That's a good guess. It's not whole tone. First word before tone starts with the letter L. If you didn't hear the question and you were tuned in, the question is, what tone makes a dominant chord dominant? This says, theory never made sense because it's also context related. Yes. Dith, you said leading. Bethany, leading. Yes, yes, that's the right answer. Rhodesy, you went to modes, which is great. But Lydian is a mode and Locrian is another mode. But leading tone, that's the answer we're looking for. The leading tone creates dominant function. Let's talk about the leading tone in 2 instances here. In the key of C major, or the leading tone of any major key is the 7th scale degree. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. In C major, the leading tone is B. The leading tone is a half step below tonic. It's always a half step below tonic. Maybe not in the key that the key signature is. Yeah, Rhodesy. Okay, so leading tone, 7th scale degree in a major key, half step below tonic. Here's why. When I put the leading tone on top of a chord, feel how it pulls to our resolution. Even if let's change it up. Let's use B diminished instead. So there's no G in the chord anymore. This is still dominant function though, because the pull is still in the same direction. Let's add a G back in and let's put the leading tone in the middle of the chord. If we put it, let's say at the bottom of the chord this time. There it is. It wants to resolve up to C. Okay, so we can feel that really strong pull. Leading tone resolving up. Leading tone is what always creates dominant function. That's why our G, our 5 chord in C, has a B in it, has a 7th scale degree. It creates dominant function. Our 7 chord, B diminished, has the same note in it, the leading tone, creates resolution. Rhodesy, let me get to your next question in a second. Just quick side note, when we transition into minor keys, let's just stick with C minor, so it's parallel. The relative is E flat, right? A flat and B flat. There is no B natural. The 7th scale degree is B flat. Okay, question for everybody who's here. Why does the natural minor scale... let me ask it a different way. Why do we have 3 different minor scales that we learn? There's a natural minor, there's a harmonic minor, and there's a melodic minor. So think about natural minor, and then what are the changes? How does the scale change when we have harmonic minor and melodic minor? Let's see. Dith, I'll answer your question, Dith and Rhodesy also, and while we wait for some responses to that. Dith says, how does your ear know which key you're in? Practice. Some people are gifted with perfect pitch, and that's great. Or if you have, you can develop a really, really good relative pitch where you can hear relationships between keys. So that takes a lot of practice and ear training. This says raised 7th for harmonic. Yes, that is correct. Raised 7th. And then when we raise the 7th scale degree in a minor key, it becomes the leading tone. When we get the leading tone in the scale is called harmonic minor because harmonic minor creates harmonic function, creates dominant function. If we don't employ the leading tone, we never have dominant function. So we'd have C minor, G minor. It's interesting. It still sounds nice. But we never have that really strong pull home because there's no leading tone. Also, none of those chords are dominant. Okay, Rhodesy, let me answer your question, and then we're going to kind of tie this all together. Rhodesy, you said you're planning a next improv in A flat, but can I go to the relative minor, which is F? Sure. Sure, I think that's close enough related that we're sticking with similar enough chords. Yeah, based on that first challenge I gave you. Stick in one key. You also, Rhodesy, as you develop more and more of this, you might want to go back and, I don't know when you filmed this, but you might want to go back to some of the keys that are more simple theoretically. Let's say simpler to see on the keyboard, like C, what we were just working in. They might help you to understand more of the relationships there first before we expand out into a whole bunch of other keys, which we definitely want to do. Okay, so tying this all together, we need to know dominant function, predominant function, tonic function. We want to be able to employ those 3 things on the fly, knowing when we're using tonic and predominant to elongate a phrase, and then when we're using dominant to put an end, create a cadence or a really strong cadence, especially in classical music, because this is in a classical style. If you're listening and you're improvising in other styles, we're not going to use dominant very often. Dominant sounds very, very classical. Let's see. Dith said, not necessarily saying that you can tell the note name, but that you can tell which is the tonic. Yeah, absolutely. That is, again, it's all ear training. Yeah. And tonic has to be in context. You always need at least 2 chords to tell if something is tonic or not. Because, let me give you an example since we're in the key of C. G major doesn't have to be dominant because it can be something in a lot of other keys. And if we only hear G major by itself, we don't know what it is. If we hear G major moving to this, oh, now we know G major is tonic. But if we hear G major moving to this, G major is dominant. It has to be in context. So Dis says, can your ear tell when you've made it home even if you don't know that it's C, for example? Yeah. That's part of the reason why we as humans can enjoy music, especially enjoy music in so many different genres and flavors and styles. Harmonic principles are always being employed to create that sense of departure and return. And it's both theoretical, but it's also emotional. And sometimes the further we depart, the more emotional a piece of music becomes. And then when the return happens back home, it's very satisfying and it feels really good. And so that's why concert halls fill up with people. A lot of people don't understand the theory behind it, but they understand the feeling behind it. And so you can usually, even if you don't know what to call it, you can usually tell when a composer has arrived and we're calling something home. However they've manipulated it in their piece for their reasons, you can usually tell that if it's a really good composition, because it will be set up in a way that we anticipate it. We want that feeling of return. Good. And yes, Bunny, you said you got your improv you transcribed. That's so good. So good. Let me go back, Rhodesy, before I answer your next question. I wasn't planning on getting into technique with you, but I'll give you a couple tips since you ask. Let's go back and think once again about the harmony that we're improving. Okay, one of the first things I said was that I wanted to challenge you to one key, and then I'd like to challenge you to tell a very specific story. That can lead you in a lot of different directions, but before you start just playing, pick at least one emotion or one feeling or one idea that you want to express. And then how can we express that? Related to that, I would really, really love to hear you create phrases that are, let's say, singable. Phrases that are singable and repeatable. So let's say we're in C. I'm not going to improvise in a classical style because that's not really my thing, but I'll just play around. So my goal is to create something that's introspective and tender and singable with repeatable segments or repeating segments. Okay, here we go. Here's going to come a repeat. Variation. That was using sped up harmonic rhythm. So I started changing the chords faster and faster and faster to bring us home. So I led us far away through there. If I go back, I was using C. Notice, even though this was improv, I can still remember what I played, so I can repeat it. I was using A minor. Let's say A minor 4. There's F6 with a 9. I went back to C, and then we repeated some things. Let's see, where did it go? I think from A, I transitioned to an E major chord, which is a non-diatonic chord. E major ends up being a secondary dominant chord. So that is our 5 of 6 in C. So if I know that, I can lead us away and create a lot of harmonic interest. Resolve it. Right after that interest has been created, I sped through a bunch of changes. Okay, there's a little bit of an example, and I tried to accomplish those things that I set out to do before. I didn't write them down, but I told everybody. It's like calling your shot in pool. I called what I wanted to make happen, and then I was striving to make that happen. But using all kinds of knowledge that we just talked about prior to that. Rhodesy, you say, can I steal some melodic ideas from other composers? Yes. In fact, studying we're not going to call it stealing, because it's only stealing if you're going to call it your own piece and try to publish it and all of that jazz. If you're using it to learn and you're using it to study and to improv on, even if you're doing it in public and you say improv on, Chopin's waltz, minute waltz, great. Just give Chopin credit. But absolutely study other composers and study what they did. Somebody like Chopin, a lot of his music would have been improv'd before he wrote it down and notated it out. Sparrow says, look at how many people use Twinkle Twinkle Little Star. Oh, and thank you for the comment, Sparrow. Thank you. That was lovely. And hello, Jeffrey. Oh, and Bunny says, create a simple sentence and then play it. That's absolutely true. Love that. So this is going to get easier, Rhodesy, if we limit our harmonic vocabulary. Yeah? The more limited we make it, the more we can focus on line, melodic line, and the more we can focus on telling that story. The more we start to expand and every key and every note becomes an opportunity, the more, once we open those doors, the more understanding we need to have about tonality, harmony, and function in order for it to make sense to a listener and for them to feel something. Yeah. So I think that's going to wrap it up, Rhodesy. Thanks for sending this in. Improv is such a cool thing, and it leads us into understanding. It's a great practical application of understanding theory. And if we can start to learn the basics there, then we can start to apply that theory. For everybody else here who's a performer, we can start to apply that theory to learning the music that we're working on to perform and studying and understanding why composers made the choices they made. So that's a cool thing. That also ties into, technique. Okay, I'll go through technique. That also ties into, though, before I go there, Rhodesy, there's a new video coming out on the channel on Saturday this week. And it's all about texture, how composers use texture, and how it's important for us to understand that as pianists. So look out for that one. It's long. It's almost 50 minutes. So grab your coffee and a bagel. Oh, awesome. Okay, Rhodesy, or technique stuff. I have one comment that I'll share with you because I don't want to spend too long on it today. There is a lot of collapse happening in the last knuckle of, especially I see 2 and 3, and I think it's in the right hand because the camera is flipped. So the very last knuckle, we don't want that ever, or the second to last. We don't want these ever to collapse and be flat or concave. Yeah. And sometimes when you were trilling, they would go very flat. That immediately makes me think of tension. There's a huge amount of tension in the fingers when they flatten like that and you try to play through it. And so we want to get rid of that, and we want the fingers to hang from the big knuckle. And we can play scales or anything else. It was really obvious, if you go back and watch the video, it was most obvious when you were trilling, and it was also a little bit obvious when you were playing scales. So you say that's why it hurts in major, especially in, I think you said, C major. It shouldn't feel actually any different whether you're in C or in another key if we have this issue, unless it happens more often on the black keys or more often on the white keys. That would be an interesting thing to take a look at. But that's really something that we want to work on fixing. And tip, I haven't given this tip probably in a year on a live stream. So here we go. When we're working on creating more stability in the last knuckles of the fingers. A great exercise that we can use is, so here's second finger in the right hand and thumb. I'm going to use those two fingers. We're simply going to bring them together. Here we go, something like that. Bring them together, and I'm going to pulse quickly without allowing the knuckle, I'm trying to see where you can see this, without allowing the final knuckle to collapse. Hello, Antonio. So I'm going to go pulse, and I'm going to do 5 times. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They're very small. You might not even be able to see this on the screen. The finger moves just a tiny bit. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But the knuckles stay nice and firm. There's no strength involved here. We just want to keep the correct shape and feel little bits of force going through the correct shape. We can go through all 5 fingers. Do the third finger, 1 and 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Do the fourth finger. They usually, for most people, get harder as you go toward fifth finger. You can work on that in both hands. That's also something you can do away from the piano, which is really cool. Don't put too much force through. We're not trying to like win an Olympic competition with how hard we can push our thumb with our other fingers. We simply want to experience when the finger's in the correct shape and is in the strongest position, not because we're holding it with tension, but because we've just simply put it there. When it's in that strongest position, we can put force through it and it doesn't collapse like that or like this. It stays curved. Yep. Okay. So Rhodesy, thanks again for submitting this, and we're going to open up for questions from everybody, and I'll answer Rhodesy's first about our next piece of Chopin, and we'll go from there. So, oh yeah, I'll get to Sir Wolseley and Dith. Great. So, Rhodesy, you said you're going to learn an easier Chopin piece. What would you recommend? How about, since you really like the style of Chopin and you haven't learned any of the nocturnes, one of the first 2, in fact, even the first 1, I think it's Opus 9, number 1. Yeah, I think you'll enjoy that. And it's in B flat minor. It's a beautiful key. You said you're looking for an easier Chopin piece. I mean, easy means different things for different people. Based on how you play when you improv, I picked something that most people would not consider easy. But I don't think it's going to challenge your technique the way some other things would, and I think it'll fit right in your wheelhouse. Yeah, and immediately in the 4th bar, we get a really nice run. Here's another interesting study for you to do, Rhodesy, and everybody could if you wanted to, but go through Chopin nocturnes, which he wrote, I'd have to refresh this. I think they were written over the span of about 10 years. Opus 9 are the first nocturnes he wrote. Compare and contrast Chopin's own use of melodic running passages in the beginning of his writing versus what he wrote at the end of his life or at the end of the sets of nocturnes. There'll be a pretty massive difference. And ironically, they don't get more complex. He doesn't write more pitches. There are more pitches used in different ways, but the melodies actually get simpler. I think there's a lot we can learn from that. Okay. Awesome. Sir Wolseley said, have you seen my email? Are we seeing a collab anytime? Well, Sir Wolseley, thanks for commenting on one of Dennis's videos. I'm going to put it on my to-do list for next year, and I'll reach out to him soon. So Sir Wolseley, I basically pitched to Dennis Zhdanov about doing a collab because I haven't written to him yet, so I appreciate that. And many of you probably watch Dennis's channel. He's a fantastic teacher. So that would be something fun, and hopefully, yeah, we'll figure out how to do that. And do that remotely. I think it would be very expensive for us to travel. either him to me or me to, I can't remember. I know he's Ukrainian, but I don't think he's living in the Ukraine right now. Okay, Dith's question. Dith says you're supposed to memorize all your pieces for this test you're taking, and you did it easily in the course of practicing with 2 of them, but the third isn't clicking. So Dith, you said it's A minor waltz. Is this Chopin's A minor waltz? The oops. Not that one. Which one is it? Sparrow asked Dennis, can somebody, so Antonio, you know Dennis, if you drop Dennis's name, the name of his name or the name of his channel in, then Sparrow can find it. Oh, okay. So Dith, oh, it's the Merry Farmer. I am definitely not familiar with that, but let me see if I can pull it up. Sheet music. Schumann, right? Okay, let's see. Okay, I think that's the one. So, memorization tips for this. Dith, can you, hello Gigi. Dith, can you play the melody in the left hand the whole time here without the use of the right hand? Do you have that part memorized? And if you don't, can we take a couple bars at a time and maybe take everything that's within one phrase or one slur mark. Hopefully we have the same slur marks. They're about 2 bars long. We want to take everything within one phrase, start to memorize what the melody is by itself. We're not only thinking about the physical movement. Can you sing it back? Can you sing it while you play it? Can you sing it when you're not playing it? Let me see what your answer is to that question. So have you done something like that? And or can you play the left hand without the right hand being involved? Because I know I bring that up because I have a number of students that learn by muscle memory and the hands get locked together. And as soon as we try to separate them or change something, everything falls apart. So Dith, you said yes. Right hand is the problem. Okay. Is it a problem at the beginning or is it a problem where we get the more melodic material? Oh, and thanks, Antonio, for dropping that in the chat. Thanks. So yeah, Dith, if you're, I think you heard my question. Are you able to play and memorize? Have you memorized the chords? So you say it's right at the transition from the first idea to the second. Okay. I'm taking you mean from measure 2 to measure 3, if we're talking about the first 2 phrases, as opposed to when the right hand joins the left hand later on in the piece. I'm going to go with that for a second, Dith, until I hear what you have to say. If it's from measure 2 into measure 3 where we're having a memory issue, let's really think about what the harmony is and let the melody, if you know the melody, let the melody cue our thought process. So we're in B flat. Next downbeat is a B flat, but it's a part of a C chord. And your left hand knows this because of the melodic content. So at least at the downbeat, when we have this, okay, so I'm talking about the wrong spot. I'll jump to measure 9 in a second. So if we know, for example, if this was the issue and if this is an issue for other people, let the melody note dictate what the harmonic movement is going to be for the other hand. So here we can cue in or pay attention to the most important pitch, the minor 7, that cues what the right hand chord is going to be. Let me jump down to measure 9. Okay. Okay, so Dith, I would separate out the couple textures that you have. We have melodic content that works between the two hands. Can we play these? And then unison is easy, right? Separate that out first. And really learn, can you sing both parts? Ba-da-da-dum and bum-ba-da-dum, ba-ba-da-da-da-dum. Obviously, we can't sing them together. When you play, can you sing one of the two parts? Sing the upper part. Ba-da-da-dum, bum-ba-da-da-da-dum. Switch it up, sing the lower part. Bum-ba-da-dum, bum-ba-da-da-da-dum. So we're focusing on one and then focusing on the other. Play them together. And finally, once we have that in our ear, see the interval relationship between those lines, the relationship of a tenth, and that they're working together. Yeah? Now, when we need to extend that, I would say remove the left hand from the equation. When we need to add the middle of the texture back in, let's remove the left hand from the equation. And we're going to work on right hand alone, playing this melodic content plus the little interjections of harmony. And so following the idea that I gave you at the very, very beginning, let's take now one measure at a time, because these are all in one measure phrases. One measure at a time. We can do this a couple different ways. First, look at the music. Play it with the music. Try to look down or look back and forth as you can, stopping every bar and repeating it. And pay attention to the movement your hand is making to execute it. Yes? And then eventually, maybe, especially if you've been working on this for a while, you're not going to need that many repetitions to be able to close your book so that you can't see the music, turn off your iPad, whatever you're using, and play it again. So, can we have that one bar memorized? So I've now memorized it after a few repetitions. And I have it memorized orally by ear. I know the melody, ba-da-da-dum, and I know da-dum, bum-bum. I know the two components. But I also have now memorized the movement of the hand. And you can see I'm doing all this without actually looking. Okay. But I haven't looked at anything else beyond that, so I can't even play the next measure for you. But that's how we want to work. One bar at a time, okay? We can go on to the next bar. Same length of phrase. You can add a different kind of challenge depending on how good you are with the process, how quickly this process comes. Or if you find that this is just way too easy, look at the one measure that we want to practice memorizing, or that we want to memorize, be able to play back. Look at it, look at the keyboard, even get your hand ready to play it. Think about what it is, remove your hand from the keys, and then imagine yourself, without looking at the music, playing it again. Just one measure at a time. And let's do a couple repeats of that before we move on to the next measure. And good thing for us, if it's only 9 through 12, if it's only 4 measures or so, we're going to accomplish this pretty quickly. It's not like we have to do this over 60 bars and go 1 bar at a time. So one measure, look at the score, look at the music, remind yourself what it is. Place your hands on the keys with the correct fingers to remind yourself of, this is where I'm starting. This is how it feels to start. Take your hand off, imagine playing it, and imagine all of the feeling of how the hand needs to move and so on, but don't actually execute it. And then while you're imagining that, can you also hear in your ear the tune, all the components? Can you hear it being played back? So if we need to do the second bar, because I haven't really seen this before, I'm taking a few repetitions to feel the movement. I changed the fingering, so I want to do it a couple more times. Now I think I've got it, so I'm going to stop looking at the music. I'm just going to look at the keys. Whenever I'm unsure, I pause for a very slight moment of time. Okay. Now, I've spent so much time on that, I can't remember the first bar. So where's the first bar? I'm going to do this just looking at it. Da-dum, da-dum. Okay, I'm going to try to play both bars. There we go. I used all of those same principles. I've just used them a lot, and so I can do it pretty quickly. Take as much time as you need, but they really do work. 1 bar at a time, 1 phrase at a time, all of those different steps. And if I was your teacher, we would actually spend time doing this in a lesson. So I don't know if you see a teacher, but this could also be something that you'd bring up in a lesson with them and ask them to test you. Can I play 1 bar? Can I just look at 1 bar and then play it for you? Things like that. Yeah. So Dith, I hope that helps. Side note. If people could stop naming albums that have songs, I'm struggling with songs for children. Yeah. I know. I think, I don't know what syllabus you're using, Dith, but I know that, like, for example, RCM syllabus, I think they print their own editions of things, and you can find, it would be great if we just called it the opus and number, especially when you're not a child taking lessons. It's something that always, whenever I'm picking repertoire for an adult student, I always tend to steer away from those pieces because the title then is usually also listed on the page. Yeah. Okay, let me jump back up. So Raja, earlier, welcome, by the way, Raja Piano. Raja said, I'm struggling to play fast. What do we need to do to play any piece faster? Is it step by step with a metronome? There are a lot of different answers to that question. So Raja, yes, in short, whenever we can use a metronome, if we know our current tempo that we're capable of achieving, and write down whatever beats per minute that is, and then we know our goal tempo, whether that's the tempo printed on the page or something slightly different. We know what that is, and we can give ourselves a timeline to continue to push the tempo forward. That is a great way to work. Also, don't underestimate in the process of doing that how important it is to really substantially slow down the tempo. Let me give you an example. And this will probably have a whole bunch of stuff in it. And so this piece is a little fresh for me. It's a Haydn Sonata in E flat. It's going to be in the video that's coming out on Saturday. So the piece right on the first page has a lot of technical stuff. So we've got thirds in one hand. We've got a really fast scale. That's all very quick. More fast scales. Okay. In order to get there, we would spend time going back to the thirds. And I'll show the music a little bit. Going back to the thirds. I'm going to spend time significantly under the allegro tempo, even when I've achieved it. Focusing on feeling relaxation, feeling the correct articulation for every note, and the dynamic movement down, decrescendo, to our final note. That's, I don't know exactly how much slower, but that's a lot slower than what we need when we play the final version, yeah? So I'm still, even when I can play a great deal faster, we're going to spend significant time making sure we can go through things more slowly. If we really want, like there's a problem right there in my performance where the turnaround that's happening here, I'm missing the thumb articulation. So if I really want to nip that in the bud as soon as possible, I'm going to play with extra focus, attention, precision, slowing down even more on that section. I know your question was about going faster, but we want every single motion that we make to be so dialed in that when we do speed up, there isn't going to be any question about the execution of them. Yeah. Now, everything else that beyond this point, it becomes very complicated because if we are playing a piece and it pushes us technically, it pushes us to do things that we haven't maybe yet achieved or is right on the border of what we're capable of achieving, we're going to need to address technique, and that's going to be very different for every different person. But in general, when we want to play faster, think about playing more lightly. Even if it says forte, play more lightly. Secondly, get rid of, in some of your practice, get rid of the finger legato. Finger legato adds tension, and when you speed up, it is inaudible, especially as something that's very, very fast. Think about a scale. It's not slow, but it's slow compared to the performance of this piece. You can hear all the separation between notes. When we speed it up, there's very little of that, and there's very little separation that still exists. Combine that with playing in a larger room, the way classical music is usually intended to be played in a hall, and the acoustics of a hall. You're not going to use any pedal. You're going to play with almost a detached touch, and it's still going to be legato. And you're going to have achieved a faster tempo because of the lightness in playing. That works for scales. And a similar principle can work for other different types of techniques, but that's my biggest tip about increasing speed is virtuosity, aka speed increase, goes hand in hand with our ability to play very, very lightly. And light doesn't have to mean not powerful. It really means our attack into the keys. The lighter we're able to make that attack and the more fleeting we're able to make that attack, the more easily we're going to be able to play faster, louder, quieter, all of the above. Our playing overall is going to be more virtuosic. The sooner we can learn that lightness. Okay, I think I'm going to leave that question there. Oh, Sparrowhawk had the next question. It was, you said, it's about consolation number 3 from Liszt. In the beginning, how do you keep the one low D flat sounding through 4 or 5 consecutive bars? I might have that piece on here. Oh, I don't. I can probably find it super fast. Oh, that's good enough. Okay. So, Sparrow. 1 D flat sounding through 4 or 5 consecutive bars, as in bars 3. The real answer is that we could do 2 things. I would never really recommend using sostenuto pedal, but it's a possibility here. We could use sostenuto to have that D hold so that we can still change with damper pedal. But even with the sostenuto pedal down, I think you'll be able to hear this. The overall tonality of that low pitch, we've lost the fundamental completely. Even though the damper never hit the string, we've lost the fundamental. And because all of our other playing has happened around this and the melody that we're bringing out, it's excited other overtones in the string. And so it doesn't really sound like a D flat pedal tone. So for that reason, I don't know if I'd use sostenuto pedal. There are a lot of people that might recommend doing that. Also, and this is something that has stuck with me since I was in college studying, and that's that it's actually rare, unless you are one of the world's best performers, it's rare that you're going to be assured that you have a piano that the sostenuto pedal works. So for any of us, gosh, I don't think I've yet been in a concert hall where it doesn't work, but there's something my teacher really enforced with me was you never know where you're going to play and when the last time was that the technician looked at the sostenuto pedal and are they even going to be available for you before the concert to work on it? And that's even at a professional level. So his basic comment to me was never count on having sostenuto pedal available for anything. Always know how to do what you need to do with the damper pedal. And when we have this piece, we're going to do the best we possibly can to make shallow damper pedal changes where I eliminate just enough of the previous harmony that when I change the middle texture, I went too far. that I can still retain as much of the low D flat as possible. Some scores, like the one that I just pulled up here that I'm not showing on the screen, some scores show complete pedal changes on every bar. If you completely change the pedal, well, we're going to completely lose that low note. It's going to be gone. So we just try to do the shallowest damper changes that we possibly can to clear enough of the harmony and enough of the melody so that it's clean. And at least, let's say, for 2 bars, maybe 3 bars, we've retained some of that lowest pitch. After that, it's somewhat down to the piano that you have. The finer the instrument and the bigger the instrument, the more that note is going to sustain on its own without you having to do anything else. And the bigger the concert grand, the more flexibility you have with the damper changes, where they can be subtle and shallow, and we can clear the middle section without clearing the bottom. But beyond that, there's nothing much that we can do except pay attention, listen, and try for as long as possible not to let the D flat go. But if we're aware of, even when the note is played by itself, I'm just going to let it ring for a little bit. And I didn't even play that pianissimo. It was a little bit louder than that. It's been probably the span of 3 to 4 bars. There's very little sound left, even without anything else happening. So we can also know and trust that even though Liszt has written tie, 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 we are not going to physically, repeat. We're not going to restrike the note. And at a certain point, about 3 measures in, the fundamental of this is going to be gone. It's going to be lost. And at that point, we don't have to worry anymore. We can do bigger pedal changes because it's not going to change the rest of the texture nearly as much as before. So, Barrow, you said some people on YouTube play the note again. I wouldn't do that. Yeah. Let's obey what Liszt wrote. Unless you, yeah. I think there's more to be learned if we obey the notation than if we play something else that he didn't intend. Unless there is research that I'm not aware of, unless there's research that says that that's a printing error or a mistake, I wouldn't go against the score. Yeah. Cool. Cool question. Okay. I'm moving through the chat, trying to looking for the next question. Rhodesy asked, is sort of off topic, but have you ever heard of an album called Everywhere at the End of Time? I have not. Sorry. What genre is it in, Rhodesy? When Rhodesy just commented, you heard that Liszt rewrote this for sostenuto pedal. Interesting. Yeah, I would love to find his personal reaction to that before I'd make a decision about using it. For the reasons that I just described, even if we use sostenuto pedal, the character, we lose all of the fundamental of the pitch. It's gone. And for that reason, I still wouldn't use it. Let's see. Bethany had a question. And this was piggybacking on a question that was, I think it was in answer to Raja. Bethany asks, any tips for evenness in quick scale-like passages, and you find you have less control going between 3 and 4? Bethany, do you have a piece in particular that you're working on that this is causing, or is this in general technique? Okay, Clementi sonatinas would be a good example. Okay, okay. We'll use the very, let's see, Clementi, Dith mentions, opus, sonatinas 2 and number 3. Dith, is that opus 36? Or is it opus 2, number 3? I only have opus 36 on my iPad. And I'm going to work on number 1 unless we're talking about the same piece. This is very, very famous. 36 number 2, third movement. We'll use that, sure. 1. Oh, there we go. Okay. Okay. There isn't a lot of movement, I guess maybe at the end. We'll talk about those bars. Okay, so I'm looking down at the bottom of the page. And we're going to look at especially moving between 4 and 3 in the right hand. Yeah. Okay. And Dith says there's a long scale at the end. We'll tackle that next. Great. So the question was about more dexterity, especially between fingers 3 and 4, and we're using Clementi as an example to go through this. So I would practice this a couple different ways. I would put a nice articulation on the 4th finger that stems from the wrist. And it's forte in the piece, which is great. We can really sink in. And we're going to feel like that one impulse starts our line. And in this case, it's on the 4th finger, the, quote, weaker finger, because we know none of the fingers are actually weaker than the others. So we're going to put an impulse on that finger and let the phrase, this is in practice in particular, let the phrase flow from that impulse. And that impulse isn't just finger articulation, because if we only articulate with the finger, it's very soft. But if we articulate from the elbow and from the wrist, it's very powerful and it's very easy. Yes? Okay, so that's step 1. Feel that in the 4th finger. Step 2, we're going to do a similar thing, but on the 3rd finger, the next finger in the passage. So 4 is going to be light. And then we're going to accent, just for the sake of practice. Once again, feeling this stem from the wrist. Thirdly, can we start to do some back and forth, semi-like trill, but still feeling like this is being played by finger and wrist simultaneously. So there's a little bit of detached feeling. Because 3 and 4 are next to each other, and I don't think I need to show you this from overhead, there's no realignment of the wrist necessary. If the wrist is behind the 4th finger and the 3rd finger here, it's going to be in the same place for both fingers. The only time this would be a problem is, let's say we weren't in a good position to begin with, and we were playing this over here and trying to articulate 3 and 4 and 5 while the wrist is out of alignment. Then we'd want to fix that. So we can still look for this in every passage. Make sure that this is back and lined up. Okay. Next thing. So, okay, we've talked about articulate from elbow and wrist down, 4 in the passage. Articulate 3 in the passage. Start to practice where we have these, especially within the repertoire, if we can build a little exercise around. So now I'm taking, in the bars we were working on, 3 and 4, using firm articulation from the wrist, less so from the fingers, and then continuing on with the passage. Okay, last little tidbit. Between 3 and 4, there can always be, let me see if always is correct. Yeah, there can always be a slight rotation in the forearm rotation or wrist rotation, depending on how you want to think about it. So even in this passage and in all Clementi, and this is really, really important in a lot of Clementi, when we have these quicker turns, but this also applies in scales, there can be just, I'm exaggerating right now, and I'll show you from the top as well, but there can be from 4, a rotation back to 3. And we can actually tell that this passage is intended to be a study of rotation because of the next bar. 2, 1, 1, all going back and forth with 4. So we can employ that rotation that we should be using in the second bar of this right in the beginning. Let me show you from overhead. So here's 4, 3, 4, 3. This is a bit exaggerated. 4, 3. You could even practice this as a trill by itself, feeling that when we're employing that rotation, it takes actually relatively little amount of finger to very, very easily and clearly articulate that difference. The faster we need to go, the more refined that rotation becomes and the smaller the movement becomes. Yeah? Let's look at the other example because Dith said there's a long scale at the end. It looks like... I would personally find in the scale that the movement between 4 and 5 is the most difficult thing at the very top of the scale. But the movement between 3 and 4 only happens once. And it's solved. The articulation issue with it is solved as long as we are keeping the wrist in alignment as we go up. And also, in this particular case, the note, the 4th finger is playing F sharp, so the wrist should come up slightly as well. Yeah. And then if I was going to practice bringing out 4 and 5, I would actually employ all of the same principles that we just talked about with bringing out 3 and 4 and creating that better articulation and differentiation between those two fingers. I would use the same principles. Where I slow down, accent, sink in, feel an impulse from the wrist at least. And then start to test myself and play it more legato. Remembering once again that none of this is actually finger legato. Because if we're going to play it at that very, very, very fast allegro tempo. Dith, I don't know how often you'd actually hear this played that fast. So, Bethany, did that answer your question? Because I know that question came from you, and I kind of grouped two questions together. So, Bethany, yeah, does that answer your question? And do you, Bethany, have a Clementi that you are working on? Because we worked on one that Dith brought up. Oh, great. Good. Okay. Oh no, it's all good, Dith. I'm glad that I can help out two people with similar questions, and we can knock it out. That sounds great. All right, let's see here. So Wolseley said, you too, it's a pain. You're working on it with Czerny. Yeah. Bethany, you said you're working on Opus 36, number 6. Let's see if there's anything different in this. Yeah. The typical Clementi scales. I would use all the same stuff we talked about. There are a couple more interesting little turns, like this one that transitions from arpeggiation and rotation really into a scale, which is neat. But I would use all the same principles we just talked about. They will all work in this as well. And of course, you can apply all of these things in your typical scale practice. If you start your day practicing some scales, that's a great opportunity, especially if you know that in repertoire you're struggling with 3 and 4 and articulation between them. Going through your scales, we were just in D, so... here's an interesting thing that I just thought of. One, we're going to accent 3 and 4 in just a standard scale that we're working on. We can start doing that with one hand at a time. 3, here's 3, 3, 4, 3, 3, 4. And that actually gets our ear doing a lot of good work because we're taking it out of usual, almost like it's not even in 4/4 in typical eighth notes anymore. Even better work to employ when we accent our notes with 3/4. When hands are playing in parallel, can we bring out especially 4 in the left and 4 in the right, and can we bring them out separately because they're going to happen at different times. That's an additional thing. We'll be practicing all the same stuff we just talked about, which is building in some greater independence. And we're also building in greater independence between the hands because we're bringing out one thing at one point and something else at another point. So that is something that we could all throw into scale practice anytime we want to. Pick a finger. For a lot of the keys, if you know your scale fingerings, 3s are going to line up between the two hands for many of them. So that's going to be an easy one to start with. But pick another finger. Pick second fingers. Oh, there was another one. And bring out each second finger. You'll be practicing great articulation with your technique, and you'll also be practicing some really, really cool ear training and independence between the hands. Let's see, David. David, hello, David. Let me just make sure that I see your question. Bethany says as a brain teaser. Yeah. David, I'm going to come back to that. I just want to make sure that I haven't missed any other questions that have come in. Colorful Mama said, can you analyze Tchaikovsky's Barcarolle? That would be an interesting video topic. I don't know if I'll do that on a stream, but that would be interesting. How many people, especially people that are still here and watching, how many of you like theory analysis? Because most of what I do on the channel here is technique-based with little snippets of theory. We started today with a lot of theory, but how many people are interested in theory? I'd love to know, because I could talk about more of it. Seth, hello, Seth. Seth asked, do you have any advice for lining up turns with the left hand in the Adagio from the Pathétique Sonata? I'm going to pull that up, and I'm going to answer that question in depth for you, Seth. And in the meantime, I'm also going to answer David's question, because David's answer is going to be much faster. David said, I see quite a few people on YouTube automatically accel when they crescendo, and they slow when they diminuendo. And is that the correct way to interpret them? No, not necessarily. They should be. We should have complete control as interpreters and performers. We should have complete control over when we choose to accelerando and when we choose to crescendo. There are times when crescendo is written to build excitement and to build emotion. Sometimes that can mean rubato, that leans forward or gets a little bit faster. And sometimes diminuendo can mean rubato that slows. But we should always experiment with choices that take us in other directions. A great example is any moment in a piece of music that is crescendoing for the sake of broadening and expanding, we should never accelerando those passages, unless it's specifically marked like accel or stringendo or something like that by the composer. But if it's supposed to be getting broader and coming to a close or coming to a big cadence, we shouldn't be speeding up to that. I think it's very typical for pianists to go faster when we crescendo. And that's actually, we can go back to scale practice. One thing that I suggest to everybody is practice scales where we actually, as we're ascending, we're going to crescendo, but we're also going to slow down. And then do the opposite as you descend, accelerando and diminuendo, because that's immediately having us practice doing the opposite, I think, of what the human tendency is to do. And the human tendency is go up, get faster. No, sure, there are times in music when that's supposed to happen and when that should happen. But we don't want our technique to be limited or our ear to be limited by that being the only choice. There are always interpretive choices. And so if we come to that conclusion after experimentation and after feeling it work in a number of different ways and hearing it work in a number of different ways, that's one thing. But we don't want to just jump there because it's what feels, let's say, easiest. So, David, that was a great question. Thanks. So jumping back to Seth's question. Oh, I think I lost it. Where is it? Here we go. Pathétique Sonata. Okay. So just as a refresher for everybody. Whoops. Sorry. Shows you as soon as you lose your focus, what can happen. So Seth's question was about left hand turns. Lining up the turns with the left hand. Let's see. Okay, let's use that one as an example. So here, I'm at the top of the page, and well, let's get on the right page. Here we go. Looking at the last measure here. The easiest way to think about these turns is going to execute the upper note right aligned with that second 16th. So, bum, bum, bum. So, this is the beginning of the bar. Here's halfway. That would be a great place to put the turn. We could make it more expressive than that. I wouldn't start there by any means. Seth said, it's nice to know I'm not the only one that makes mistakes. Yeah. So Seth, is that where you're currently lining up the turn? Are you lining it up on the second 16th? We want to make that very easy. There's kind of a common theme with turns in Beethoven, Mozart, sometimes Chopin, where when we are learning pieces for the first time, and when we're really, we're always students of the repertoire, but when we are earlier students of the repertoire, we want to line up those ornaments rhythmically, and that's going to make it much, much easier to execute. It takes a lot of control. That there is no quick way to get from point A to point B with the amount of control and independence we need with the two hands in order to accomplish something like an unmetered turn. That's going to be very difficult, and the only thing that's going to get us there is a lot of experience and a lot of time practicing, and eventually going through repertoire where we have to play kind of polyrhythms. That's going to help a lot. But in the meantime, when we're not there, let's line it up rhythmically with the left hand. So that's what happens is that I skip left hand notes. So here, I'll put it back. No skipping any left hand notes anymore. We play the beginning of the turn, the top note. And this becomes, 30 seconds? So we play 30 seconds right in rhythm. And then the entire turn fits within that 1/16th note. There is nothing wrong with playing that turn in that particular way. Let's go on to the next one. There are a couple different ways this could go. I would, at the early stages of learning this, I would suggest the same thing, where we begin the turn lined up with that 16th note. Yeah. And eventually, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, eventually we can break that habit. But that's not something I would do anytime soon. That would be like after you learn the pathétique for the first time and you come back to it 5 years later or 6 years later. We might break that pattern of where we put the ornamentation. Seth says, what about the polyrhythm in this piece? I don't think there's really a tremendous amount of polyrhythm. Everything lines up pretty well. There are triplets, but when I say polyrhythm, I really mean there's an occasion of 4 against 3, but that's... gosh. It's such a small part of the movement. So when I mean polyrhythms, I'm especially talking about like having 2 in the left and 7 in the right or something like that. Something that's very, very different than typical. So not 2 against 3 and not 3 against 4. I'm not a big fan of on 4 against 3. I'm not a big fan of mathematically dividing that all up. I would rather that you learn 2, 3, 4. Just learn what it feels like. So 2, 3, 4, 1. Learn that one hand. The left hand here is obviously very easy. It's just repeating triplets. And when we put them together, we should not be trying to think about da 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 da. All of the combined rhythm. I use combined or a compound rhythm to teach 2 against 3. Da 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 da. If we shorten that to 3 in the right versus 2 in the left, da da da. We can learn compound rhythm that way, but I don't think I would ever teach it for 4 against 3. I would always teach, feel that as one impulse. Feel the left hand as one impulse. And over time, as we have felt those things separately, we're going to put them together. And we have to let muscle memory, part of that, train our ears to what it's supposed to sound like. I hope that makes sense, Seth. So did that help? Your question was originally about the turns and lining them up. Anytime you have turns, I would say for many, many, many years into our playing, let's line them up rhythmically with something that's already happening in the left hand, rather than trying to throw them in some really neat interpretive style, but that totally confuses us. We're much better off keeping the pulse steady and fitting a turn, a tasteful turn within the pulse. Let's see. So I had asked about theory. There are a lot of people that say, "Oh, love theory." Okay. Great. Sparrow says, you listen to theory, but it's in one ear and out the other. And Sparrow, you say, you don't want to know. Yeah, I understand. And Sir Wolseley, yeah, just not enough time. It takes some time. It takes some time, definitely. But there are ways. So another pitch for this Saturday's video. This Saturday's video is an analysis, but it's totally not from the perspective of theory. So it's quite different, and it's really geared toward helping perform, helping understand ways we can look at the notes to perform them better. But there's no talk about major minor chords. There's no talk about Roman numeral analysis. None of that. So Christopher, I think Christopher's got the next question here. And hello, Christopher. Oh, great. So Christopher said you really enjoy when I throw in a little tonal analysis. Cool. Oh, and thanks. So Christopher, I was just saying thanks to, you said you found one of my amazing grace arrangements. I have two. One is very slow and one is very fast in a kind of a faux gospel style. And let's see, Seth says, theory has too much jargon. I think that's the problem. There sure is a lot, and we're always talking about numbers in theory. That's, I think, what's most confusing for people in general is numbers, when we say them out loud, mean so many different things in theory, because we have numbers that are attached to Roman numerals. We have numbers that are attached to inversion numbers, inversion symbols. We have numbers that are attached to scale degrees. There's probably even more than that. We have numbers that are attached to intervals. And when you become fluent in the language, you immediately switch back and forth between what you're thinking about. But that is probably one of the biggest stumbling blocks I've seen for people that are just getting acquainted with theory, is that when it comes to, when we talk about one particular item, like intervals, we can understand that. And then when we talk about chords or inversion numbers, we can understand that. But then when we start to apply the two things and side by side and talk about one in the first half of a sentence and the other in the second half of a sentence, it's like interchanging there and there in English. You have to have you have to know your grammar in order to get the word correct, right? Oh, Sparrow said, just quickly, can you show us if and how you turn your wrist for the first notes of Für Elise? And then I'm going to get to XZY's question about octaves. Cool. First four notes of Für Elise. There is a slight turn, a rotation of the wrist. I don't even know if you can see that, but it's purely going from, let's say if 4, the second note of the piece, 4 is the wrist in more neutral position. Rhodesy does not like this piece. 4 is in kind of a neutral position, and 5, we're going to rotate into 5. Okay. It's just a trill that's very slow. That really, really helps have tremendous control over those first two notes. Of course, we have to start on 5, so we have to know ahead of time where neutral is. Does everybody understand what I mean by neutral? And then where the rotation happens to, so that we can come back on the second pitch to neutral. Would that be at all helpful? Usually I demonstrate wrist rotation from the side, but I'll show you from the top. Sure. So here is neutral for fourth finger. And then when we need to rotate to 5, it's just a little bit. It's about that much. The thumb is lifting off, maybe not even an inch, 3/4 of an inch between neutral for D sharp and how fifth finger needs to be articulated. Yes, and Sparrow, you say, you try to subdue the turning, but you always need some. Yeah, I wouldn't even let the rotation be subdued by your choice of dynamic, but not by your choice of technique to execute it. Bunny says, improv on Fur-Elise, and you'll love it. Yeah. I mean, really, it's just a lot of it is A and E, which is the 1 chord and the dominant chord. And then again. And then we go to 3. And then, let's see. What is that? The 5 of, it technically would be the 5 of 4. You could also, if you really want to have fun, you could play it way faster and work on those repeated notes with your left hand. Let me jump back to XZY's question. You say when playing fast, repeated octaves, you've heard people talk about moving backwards and forwards rather than staying in one stop or in one place. I'm wondering what that means and why people do it. Yeah. So that is one particular motion. If we take just a G octave, you'll see people move back and forth in and out of the keys like that, right? The principle behind this is to keep the wrist and the arm in motion and keep it fluid so that we're not locked in one place and trying to really perform one of the more challenging bits of technique where fingers get locked, wrist gets locked, and we end up kind of pulsing from the forearm only. That might work for us for a very short period of time, like at most a few measures. And if we're not able to let go of that locked mechanism and let it relax and start again, it's going to kill our arm very quickly. And so the principle behind it is always, if we keep the wrist in motion and we keep the hand in motion and we keep the forearm in motion, we're preventing any of that locking up from happening. It doesn't mean it's easy to execute repeated octaves by any means, but it's easier to keep them going if we have that kind of motion. Another thing that you can employ for fast repeated octaves is a sense of, this is actually what I prefer of the two. I don't like feeling like I have to move in and out all the time. But I prefer practicing things in groups. So for example, maybe in a group of 6. There still ends up being a little bit of in and out, but what I'm feeling is a drop into one and a lift out. And what I'm also doing in the process is I'm trying to capture a tiny bit of using gravity and natural rebound to help me out. I think of it like a bouncing ball. So you drop a ball, basketball, like a real toy bouncy ball, any of those things. You drop it from a certain height. It has kinetic energy and it falls. And when it hits the ground, we get a strong bounce back. And subsequently, if we don't touch it again, the bounces continue to get smaller and smaller and smaller, but it continues to bounce, right? It never just hits the ground and doesn't rebound. And we can employ a similar mechanism in our playing where when we drop into a key, we can build in a sense of rebound, especially in the wrist. Whoops. Usually I start people off by feeling this with groups of 2, where the first is a strong drop, and the rebound is very light. That's going to be the easiest one. You might even not do it on an octave. Do it on a fifth to start with before we have to employ the stretch in the fingers, which adds tension. Then we can build from there, and we can do a group of 3. And every one is getting softer. Then we can go to a group of 4. We can go to a group of 6. Maybe after a lot of experience with it, we can build groups that are even longer, like 8 and 9 and 12. That's going to be really difficult. So I find when I have a piece of music that requires that type of execution, I practice in all of these points where I restart the bounce. I restart the fall into the key, which doesn't happen very often. And then the remainder of all of the repeated notes, whether it's octaves or chords that are very fast, the remainder of all of them is as natural of a rebound as possible. To even out the dynamics, I start to employ a little bit more finger to make sure that all of my dynamics stay the same. So I'm not hearing a strong 1 and then 3 that are nearly silent. But the underlying principle is the same as what you initially asked about. I'm feeling this now as an up and a down motion. But the byproduct is that the wrist stays in motion. And because the wrist is in motion, the forearm can't be locked either. So every time I need to drop, I'd have to drop from up higher, which means I have to lift to get back. Yeah. So you say, yes, moving is a way of stopping you from being tense. Yes, absolutely. And doing in groups, spaces out the ones, well, not even the ones that are played tensely. None of them are played tensely. One is a drop in one direction, and the others are a release in the other direction. And so none of them actually are tense. They're all, let's say, equally relaxed, but moving in opposite directions. So you'll also even see, going on the same concept, you'll see people that subtly might shift in an octave. They might shift back and forth between the thumb and the fifth finger. They might favor one and then favor a little bit of the other and go back and forth. And anytime we get to move around the keyboard, as soon as we get to play a scale or something else, some other passage that's not just a repeated note, that movement helps to free us up. So octaves that are arpeggiated or octaves that are flying around laterally are usually easier to play than octaves that are stagnant and in one place, because the repertoire builds in the movement that keeps us from going tense. Whereas the ones that are stagnant, we have to build in the movement that stops us from locking up. Yeah. Oh, that's a good question. Fun times. I was playing, I pick G because that's the octaves that begin the Liszt, Schubert, Erlkönig. That's very famous. But I've never played the Liszt. I sight read the original in a theory class of all places when I was a master's student. And somebody sang it. I can't remember who it was. But neither of us had worked on the piece before, but we were analyzing it in class, and we just played it. Oh, Christopher, thank you so much for the super. I really appreciate that. Oh, I think I've covered all of the questions. I see Dith said, remember to hit the like button. Yeah, please, if you can hit the like button, that would be great. And let me know, did I miss anybody's question? Do we have any more today? We're going on close to 2 hours. This is about when we usually start to wrap up. Woohoo. Oh, thanks, Christopher. I appreciate it. Yeah, if anybody's got a question, I can stick around for another few minutes, or we can wrap up. That is fine with me. Antonio, you have a question? Brilliant. We'll make Antonio's question the final question. And Bunny, thanks for sending me. I'll check it out. I will check it out. Oh, these are fun. I enjoy these. I can pick on some people. Let's see, Seth. When are you gonna send in a video for us to hear? Hey, Jess. Hello. And those of you, if you've just joined in today, XZY, is this your first stream? If you're still here, and for all of you if it's your first or your second time here, you can always send in some of your playing and we can chat about it. And there's a link or instructions on how to do that in the description below. Oh, Seth says when you can play something without mistakes, don't wait that long, Seth. The more you learn, the more you know the more you learn, there's more to know. Especially about music. See, Antonio says, at times when I play a piece I know relatively well, I change the fingering without thinking about it. Is that a bad thing? Oh, awesome, XZY. Thank you. And yeah, come back. We do these streams every 2 weeks or so. Antonio, I have two thoughts on that. And I would say at early levels of playing, we don't want to change our fingering. There is something to be said for being able to navigate around a piece of music and changing fingerings. And because it's our ear that starts to guide us, and it's other knowledge that begins to guide us, and our technique just goes with the flow, if you will. But if we're not at a point where all of those components are pretty highly developed, changing fingering can be a little dangerous, I'd say, because when we learn something and we practice it over and over again, we are building a lot of muscle memory. We're building a lot of that type of memory. That's usually if we divide memory into 4 components, that's usually the first thing that gets worked on, because for most people, we experience what it feels like first, before we know what it sounds like, before we know anything else. If we change that feeling at all, which means changing a finger, it even means sometimes changing dynamics too much, changing articulations. If we change any of those things, we're changing the way we're asking our body to perform at the keyboard, which means stopping the neurons from firing the way they've been trained and asking them to do something different. There is a point at which some of those things, some changes aren't going to cause such a dramatic difference. Changing fingering is not one of those. That's going to cause a big difference in how we feel to play it. And I know you're not intending to, let's say, take exams, or I'm not even sure, Antonio, if you're intending to perform for other people live or in public, but one of the worst byproducts is that if we're not ready to do something like that, and we ask ourselves to be put under pressure, as our mind is going to go, I don't know which one you want me to choose. And it'll happen mid-performance, and everything will shut down. That's one of the things that can cause really big memory lapses and blocks in performance, even for professionals. If we change fingering and we don't have the tools in place to get out of the hole we just dug for ourselves, it's really bad. So whenever we're practicing, really important, when we're working on learning a piece and perfecting it, use the same fingering. Absolutely. When we get to a point where we want to work on being able to, let's say, fake our way through a mistake in a performance or recover after using an unintentional finger, that's a different process. And I would save that until much, much later in your journey. So for everybody that's here, I don't recommend changing fingering. There are a couple professionals that I know, for example, that they claim, they could play any of Bach's preludes and fugues, and they can use any finger on any note, and that's a fine feat. That's great. Is it really necessary? It shows a mastery to a certain degree, sure. But those are also people that are, I would probably consider somewhat prodigies. People who have been performing since they were 4, 5, 6 years old. And so when they are 50, let's say, and they say, oh, I've learned how to play Bach with any finger at any time, I think of that almost more like they found something that they could challenge themselves with, rather than this is something that everyone should hold as a standard that we should all achieve. Oh, all right. Thanks, Antonio, for the question. Let's see. So when I asked about people sending stuff in, Dith said it's hard to set up for filming. Dith, all you need is a phone. And you saw what Rhodesy sent in today. It was a phone that just set here. Just like this. It stands up by itself. And you can see the whole keyboard. I know I'm picking on you. But Dith, we'd all love to hear you play. Same with Seth. I know we've heard Antonio, so thanks for doing that. We've heard Sparrow play. We've heard Sir Wolseley play a bunch. Dith says, yeah. Awesome. And Sparrow says, you think you could have something ready for next time. That's great. I usually take submissions kind of first come, first serve. So send to me whenever you have one. And I usually limit them to 1, maybe 2 in a session, depending on what they are. Okay, great. I think we'll call it a day. Lots of great questions. Everything from theory, composition, to finger alignment and wrist rotation and scales and Clementi and so on. So awesome stuff. Thanks everybody for tuning in. If you haven't hit that like button, hit the like button, please, please, please. Also, 2 more things. There's a new arrangement dropping on my other channel on Friday. If you'll go check that out, it's an arrangement for left hand only, if you're into something challenging. So that's coming out Friday, and then there's a video on Pianist Academy here coming out Saturday. It uses a real tiny snippet of that arrangement, and then probably half the video we talk about that Haydn Sonata in E-flat major that I played a little bit of earlier today. So be sure and check out those 2 videos if you can. Okay. I'll see everybody next time. I think it's going to be 2 weeks. Thanks everybody for being here. Practice smarter, not harder. And I'll see you in, oh my gosh, November. If you're celebrating Halloween, have a great Halloween. Stay safe. And if you have kids, I hope they have a good time and nobody gets sick from candy. All right, everybody. I will see you in 2 weeks. Take care.